Senator Ludlam.
Thanks, Mr. Deputy President. So what is it exactly that we're doing here? A prorogation and a recall of the Senate. The first time that the Governor-General's office has ever been used in this way to drag the parliament back. To give the government the opportunity to call a snap election because a few weeks ago national opinion polling was showing that up as a tremendously bright idea. So here we are. The Abbott government should stand condemned today for what is being done. 3 Abbott-era industrial bills that are just really the proximate trigger for this cheap and counterproductive assault on the trade union movement. Productivity is actually up since the ABCC was abolished in May 2012, and yet the government has had the nerve to put the word productivity in the title of the bill. The Productivity Commission, some people who know a little bit about productivity, you'd have thought, said the following in their report in 2014. They said this: productivity growth in the Australian construction sector, that's who we're spending all day vilifying and attacking rhetorically. Productivity growth in the Australian construction sector has ebbed and flowed over the last 30 years. There was a significant increase in labour and multi-factor productivity from 94-95 to 2012-2013. However, most of the improvement was concentrated in relatively short bursts spanning just a few years, including most recently in 2011-12. Ebbed and flowed. There's actually no statistical evidence whatsoever that introducing for the short unhappy period that the ABCC was on the statute books had any impact of productivity at all. It's gone up since the ABCC was abolished in the construction sector. The statistics on industrial action, admittedly, sector by sector, have only been kept, I think, since around 2008. It's a shorter data set. But the ABS data on industrial disputes from September that they published in September 2015 showed that the average annual level of days lost per 1,000 employees in the construction industry increased significantly from 2008 to 2012. What do you know? It's the period that the ABCC was in force, but then fell back to near previous levels in 2013 and 14 after the ABCC had been abolished. And we can come in here and talk all we like about productivity, or we can talk about industrial action and the effect that that has on the economy, but surely this should be first and foremost about safety, about people who are able to come onto unsafe work sites and stop the clock and get people off the job if lives are at risk. 2 of the most dangerous workplaces in this country are on construction sites and behind the wheel of heavy freight vehicles. So there's a certain dark irony that both cohorts of workers are in the crosshairs this week. The bills that we've been pulled from all corners of the country to suddenly debate in this emergency sitting are both designed to target the very people and institutions whose principal role has been to uphold and in some instances try and enforce a culture of workplace safety, and in particular the importance of preventing accidents and workplace deaths before they occur, the culture of prevention. Whether that be on a building site or on a national freight route, surely that's what this should be about. What is the motivation that is driving the government to target these working people this week of all weeks? We know why it's happening. The Prime Minister gets his election trigger, that's the first thing. He and Senator Cash get to fill our television screens with numbingly repetitive talking points on how much they hate you for organising for the collective benefit of your workplace colleagues. This is 19th century class warfare dressed up as a 21st century productivity agenda. And it's probably, to be fair, the only issue that could possibly have united the dangerously divided factions of the Liberal and National parties, who are quietly tearing each other to pieces behind the scenes. Actually, some of it's not that quiet. In what looks, to an outsider anyway, to be a somewhat grotesque battle for the soul of your party between the centre-right neoliberals and the insurgent Delcons, the adorably named delusional Conservatives. And the safest place for you all to resolve this dispute is really from opposition, quite frankly. What better way, though, to distract attention away from the internal bloodletting than with a full-throated attack on the trade union movement? So here we all are. And if this was just a symbolic or a rhetorical attack, it would obviously be bad enough. We're all used to it, but that would be bad enough. But the legislation that's actually before us, that it is my fervent hope the Senate is going to dispose of again within a few short hours, would actually reintroduce some of the most coercive and outright dystopian laws that have ever sat on the Australian statute books. These laws propose in some instances to reverse the onus of proof around industrial action, to remove the right to silence, to allow officials of the ABCC, this industrial secret police force, to enter premises without a warrant, to demand to know names of addresses, the powers to compel people who have evidence relating to an investigation to answer questions, to compel you on pain of a jail term to answer their questions, provide information, disclose or provide documents, and if you fail to comply you can be prosecuted by the Commonwealth DPP and go to jail for 6 months, to prevent people from revealing that any of these processes are even underway, to prevent you from disclosing that you've been forced to give testimony to the Commission while overriding your right to silence. So much for the Liberal Party. What happened to the Liberal Party's centuries-old tradition of protecting the individual against the overwhelming power of the state and its police and security apparatus? What a disgrace you are. ASIO don't have the ability to exercise some of these powers in pursuit of violent extremists threatening mass casualty attacks. What the hell is the government up to? Singling out these individual cohorts of workers. When the ABCC was in force, before it was partially abolished in May 2012, and I say partially because obviously the Greens would have gone further. You can go back and you can check the record for the amendments that were defeated. It was one of the agencies that at the time was empowered to scrape the phone and internet records of working people, meaning that without a judicial warrant they could map the physical location of individuals every time they used their phones, and they could draw these very, very fine-grained maps of their social network. Who is talking to who on a building site? Who is talking to who? Who's talking to a journalist? Who's talking to their family? And where were they at the time that those calls were made or those text messages were sent? And if this bill fails this week, we'll have to take it as a working hypothesis that a reconstituted ABCC would have joined the growing queue at Senator Brandis's door, again seeking warrantless metadata access for people whose only crime was their choice of occupation on a building site. Here's what the Law Council said about these reprehensible bills. A number of features of the bill are contrary to the rule of law principles and traditional common law rights and privileges such as those relating to the burden of proof, the privilege against self-incrimination, the right to silence, freedom from retrospective laws, and the delegation of lawmaking power to the executive. It is also unclear, the Law Council say, as to whether aspects of the bill which infringe upon rights and freedoms are a necessary and proportionate response to allegations of corruption and illegal activity within the building and construction industry. These are the sort of things, century-old legal protections, that our Attorney-General, as the first law officer in this country, are empowered and entitled to protect those freedoms. And instead he is in here strong-arming the Senate into dissolving those rights, abolishing those rights for a very narrow and very specific class of Australian worker. You are a disgrace. What's actually going on here? A number of senators have already spoken of the context, that of all of the various things that the government had sought to bring the Senate back for, of all the different kinds of corruption, of the various issues that are facing us, and poor Treasurer Scott Morrison's desperate search for the revenue that he's going to need to have any attempt at all to balance the books in a week or two. Why don't we go looking elsewhere, rather than simply targeting your political opponents? 11.5 million documents, a few hundred of which have been released. The world's largest offshore law firm, Mossack Fonseca. There are 12 national leaders who have been identified, 143 politicians, their families, close associates from around the world, who are known to have been using these offshore tax havens. And they act through these intermediaries, most of them based in places like Switzerland or Hong Kong or Panama, for more than 300,000 companies registered in tax havens. What do? They help foreigners set up Panamanian shell companies to hold financial assets while obscuring the identities of the owners. That's what they do. And individuals and companies with uncomfortable amounts of cash at their disposal frequently seek assistance to create these shell companies, which is very helpful if you want to obscure the identities of those in charge of the company, or they just shift the money offshore into a more permissive tax regime. Or why not do both? Mossack Fonseca is very, very good at both, or they were. Tax havens essentially are this global network of secrecy jurisdictions where the world's wealthiest people exploit the system to avoid paying tax. Why don't we have a Royal Commission into that? Why don't we have a bill on that from the government this week of all weeks? That's a Senate recall I could get behind. That's a Governor-General's speech that I could get behind. That'd have a bit of weight behind it, wouldn't it? The Tax Justice Network have pointed out that they believe there are somewhere between 21 trillion with a T, and 32 trillion of individual private financial wealth offshore parked through tax havens. The Tax Justice Network points out that they could account for as much as 50% of all world trade. Half. Squirreled away through intermediaries with the help of companies like Mossack Fonseca. And the scandal is not that this is illegal, the scandal is that it is entirely permitted by law. It's perfectly legal. Where the hell's the Royal Commission into that? There are two other significant things to note about the Panama Papers. Firstly, is that only a tiny fraction of the source documents have been released into the public domain. Practically homeopathic quantities of this document drop have been enough to tip the financial world on its axis. At some point, the entire cache is likely to go live, and then we really will see who's who. And the second thing is that the Panama Papers wiped another deep corruption scandal off the front page. You'd probably be aware, or maybe senators had already forgotten, that after a 6-month investigation across 2 continents, Fairfax Media and the Huffington Post had revealed that billions of dollars worth of government contracts were awarded as a result of bribes paid on behalf of firms including British icon Rolls-Royce, US giant Halliburton, who are very active here in Australia, and allegedly the offshore arm of Australia's Leighton Holdings. And their names are all over these documents. Unaoil carved up portions of the Middle East oil industry for the benefit of Western companies between 2002, 2012. 2002, highly significant date. That is the year that the Howard government participated in the illegal invasion and occupation of a country that posed no military threat to Australia whatsoever. And these documents show that the offshore arm of Leighton Holdings was involved in serious, calculated corruption. Leaked emails show that the company was paying millions of dollars in bribes to Iraq's Deputy Prime Minister, the Oil Minister, to win more than $2 billion in oil field and pipeline contracts. Excellent return on investment. Thoroughly corrupt. Where is the Royal Commission into that? No sign of a tough cop on the beat. And it is, with some cheerfulness, I guess, to note that we finally got the Labor Party over the line on necessity for a Royal Commission into the banking and finance sector. And that's strong work over a number of years by Senator Christine Milne, Senator Pete Wish-Wilson, and obviously those others on the crossbench, Senator Dastyari, Senator Xenophon, Senator Williams, actual cross-party collaboration on an issue of tremendous national significance. The call now for a Royal Commission into the banks is picking up a little bit of speed. No sign of a pulse over here. No Royal Commission into the banks. What about a fundraiser? Election fundraisers sponsored by banks, on the other hand, that's an entirely separate matter. That's where some of our coalition colleagues will be heading after this session of Parliament gets up, to the election fundraiser sponsored by the NAB. Well done. Some days you folks make it very, very obvious how you roll. I want to know whether the Liberals who will file in here this week to lecture the Labor movement about corruption might want to spell out a little bit more about your former Liberal Party State Director, who siphoned off, I think, somewhere in the order of $1.5 million out of party funds through inflated printing and logistics invoices, apparently over a period of more than 4 years, or the roll call of senior ministers from a Premier on down, brought crashing back to earth by the New South Wales ICAC. Do not come in here lecturing the Labor movement about corruption take a bit of a look at yourselves. The only good thing, I think, that can come from this debate, apart from the fact that it appears that the bill's likely to be defeated, is that the profile and the necessity for a national ICAC is back on the agenda again. And I thank the support again of our crossbench colleagues who have come on board, or those who have been working on that issue for a number of years. And those, it's one of those ideas that the time has obviously come, and clearly the politics aren't right yet, but at least it's back in the picture. But the only place that the Liberal Party seems to be interested in looking around for corruption is in the backyard of their political opponents. Now, I know that they're just playing to their base, and maybe it will quiet some of the more carnivorous instincts of those on their backbench, but successive polls are showing that the Australian public are not buying it at all. The genius move of calling the Senate back isn't looking quite so clever now, that successive opinion polls are showing that you might lose government or be faced with a hung parliament. What an interesting few years that was, when the House of Representatives was returned to a debating chamber rather than a place of dismal theatre. We were of the view that Prime Minister Turnbull meant what he said when he said that he would be going full term and that the election would be sometime late August, early September. And we still think that that is the case, so that you can tell us whether or not there's actually going to be a coherent tax policy in this country, so that you can tell us, beyond slogans and buzzwords and jargon, what your actual plan for the diversification of the Australian economy is, as the market for our bulk export of low-value commodities collapses day by day. You could tell us, if you decided to go full term, what your plan is for the climate and the fact that the industries that you've been pumping public funds into for decades have cooked the Great Barrier Reef. If you went full term, you could tell us whether or not you're even faintly interested in housing affordability, whether there's going to be any plan for the 26,000 homeless children who have nowhere to go tonight. 26,000 people under 18 without a home. Sometime between now and September you could have spelled out your plan for that. But if you're serious about an early election after the shambles of the last 2.5 years, then go ahead and pull that double dissolution trigger, and we'll see you on election day.